Hey, everybody, welcome to the Lawfare Live Impeachment Trial Morning Briefing. I'm Ben Wittes here with David Priest and Quinta Jurecic, and we are, as we did yesterday, for those of you who missed yesterday's show, we're going to do a brief recap of yesterday, take your questions, and right at the end, do a little preview for today, which will be it's a little bit more of a puzzle than the preview was yesterday. So, Quinta, give us the overview from your perspective of what happened yesterday.
Sure. So yesterday, the House managers essentially walked through a timeline of what Donald Trump was doing in the weeks and months after the election, and then sort of speeding up in the time heading toward the riot itself. So the argument that they were building was pretty clearly that Trump encouraged and cheered on violence among his supporters in the time leading up to the election and immediately after, that he used violent rhetoric during that period as well, that his language about a stolen election in the period immediately after the vote took place had the effect of sort of riling up his supporters, and that he was aware of that and continued to use that language. So basically making the argument that January 6th was a natural outgrowth of the rhetoric that the president was using. And then as the timeline moved closer to the day itself, they essentially walked through what Trump was doing and tweeting during the rally, and then during the riot itself. So once again, they showed a lot of videos of the rally and subsequent riot, transposed against tweets from Trump and comments from Trump during that period to kind of show that he was aware of the violence and egged it on. Included in this presentation were some, I think, pretty disturbing videos. Some of them are videos that people may have seen before of the shooting of Ashley Babbitt, the DC Metropolitan Police officer being crushed in a door and screaming in pain. There was also some video that hadn't been seen before that I personally found pretty disturbing from security footage from the Capitol building. So there was video of Mitt Romney essentially walking down a hallway in the Capitol, and Capitol Police officer Eugene Goodman, who is the same officer who'd misled the rioters to move them away from the Senate chamber, basically comes running down the hallway, gestures at Romney, and then Romney basically takes off in a sprint in the other direction. Romney said, so that video had never been seen before. Romney said at the time that he had known, he'd obviously been aware that happened, but hadn't known the officer was Officer Goodman, which adds an additional twist. There's also a video that was shown of Mike Pence being evacuated from the Senate chamber, and is really just, yards away from the rioters who had just passed by that door. There was also footage of Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and his staff and security basically walking down a hallway, then suddenly running back through the hallway in the same direction that they came after they run through Capitol Police officers locked the door that they walked through. So they came extremely close to rioters. I think that the overall takeaway here is just that no members of Congress were hurt during the riot, but it was an extremely close call. As we know, 5 people died, but it could have been much, much, much worse than it actually was. And again, throughout all of this, Trump did nothing to stop it. We know that he did nothing to stop it. Per news reports, he was pleased at some points with the violence, and then sent out tweets essentially saying, we love you, remember this day, sort of on the surface telling rioters to go home, but right underneath that telling them that he was pleased with their performance.
Ben, you're on mute.
Sorry. David, what were your major takeaways from yesterday?
Yeah, that overview captures every major element. Thanks, Quinta. My reactions or reflections on it. First of all, I said at the time and on Twitter, and I'll back it up. This was precise. This was methodical. It was an absolutely damning presentation. And I looked at it through the lens of a briefing instructor. For years, I coached and briefed senior government officials on how to give briefings at a high level to the president and others. And this is exactly the kind of thing you want, right? You want somebody who tells them precisely what they're going to say in a few pieces, and they did that with an outline. You want them to highlight where they are in the outline, and you want them to give vivid, sticky moments, like 58 steps away from where I'm standing now, like the data visualization, which was actually brilliant, of showing where the rioters were at the same time as showing where Vice President Pence was, or where Mitt Romney was, where Officer Goodman was. That is not going to leave our brains. You might lose some of the words in a presentation, but you're not going to lose that visual if you saw it. And if you did not watch it, I encourage all of you to watch it. It is a masterclass in using simple data visualization to make the point in a presentation. That said, I will have one quibble, which is I thought they could have done one element better in this argument. When they were showing most of the video clips of the violence at the Capitol, it became a series, and it was riveting, and it accomplished its purpose of actually getting the senators to pay attention to the trial. But I think there could have been more in there just to say exactly what Trump was or was not doing at that exact moment. The point of the trial is not that there was a riot at the Capitol. The point of this trial is to prove that it is linked inexorably to Donald J. Trump, to his actions and his inactions. And it would have been more powerful if after every video clip they said, and at this moment, Donald Trump did nothing. Or, and at this moment, Donald Trump was preparing to tweet that he hated Mike Pence. Just put the word Donald Trump after each of those videos would have been an even more impressive presentation to what already was a very impressive one.
All right, I will just add to this what I think are some of the deficiencies in this presentation, which are actually not the fault of the managers. And I want to say that I thought yesterday I praised Joe Neguse as the sort of runaway star of the day. Yesterday had a different runaway star, which was Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands, who just did a spectacular job. And so I think even the weak links among the managers, and there were some, were workmanlike and fine. The overall presentation, I agree with both David and Quinto, was exceptionally well organized and well put together. And yet they were chomping at the bit of the constraints of the forum. This is 8 hours of speechifying, and that is not how you run a trial, right? They had to act like this was their opening argument. We will show that. They also had to act like it was their closing argument, because this may be the last time they get to address the Senate. And by the way, it's also the case in chief, right? So the case is these arguments. And that, while Quinta and David are right, that you get to add little tidbits of new information, you don't get to fundamentally expand the record this way. It also, not allowing the presentation of live witnesses, it also creates factual disputes. And we saw one of those at the end of the day, right, where so the managers had said that David Cicilline, who, by the way, did an excellent job as well, he was quite good, had cited a phone call that Donald Trump made to Senator Mike Lee, and Lee's description of that phone call in a press story. And Lee got up at the end of the day and moved to have that stricken from the record, because he contested that it was in fact what he had said. And there's, of course, no way easily to resolve this issue, because there's nobody under oath establishing the record. And so what do? Well, you sort of shrug and you say you'll live with the ambiguity. And this is not how you actually conduct a trial. And I think they really do, as much as I admire what they did within the constraints of the forum, it's important to note that the form is really constraining them, and they're, relying on a bunch of anonymously sourced press reports for how the president was reacting to certain things, and people's senses of things as reported by some source to some media organization. Now, they got around that to some degree by attributing certain stuff to Ben Sass, but who did not contest it. I think not having somebody testifying as to the president's reaction is a real deficiency in the case. Sorry, Quinta, you sound like you're trying to
get I was just going to say that I think you're not wrong, but I think that Mike Lee is actually a bad example here, because Cicilline did describe that story accurately. You can see if you read his, listen to his comments along with the text of the story. And I believe that the source for the story was, on the record, a spokesman for Mike Lee. So there's actually, Lee is correct in or he did a good job in creating a sense of ambiguity. I don't think that this story is actually ambiguous at all. That said, you are absolutely right that there are points where it would have been easier to have witnesses.
So the mere fact that Jamie Raskin complied with Lee's request to have it stricken, my point isn't that Lee's complaint has merit. My point is that you can actually throw smoke up by denying things in a way that you can't if the testimony is under oath.
Well, yeah, we got two different things going on here. One is that was an unforced error, because by presenting everything equally as fact, whether it was a Trump tweet or video evidence or what was claimed by a source in an article, they're opening this up. What they need to do is use good briefing tradecraft and say, ABC News reported that this happened. And then the issue isn't what happened, it's did ABC News report it or not? That's the issue. The second problem is, of course, the issue of, are you going to open it up to witnesses or not? You don't need a witness if you show the ABC News report on a screen. You do need the witness if you're actually talking about whether it happened or not. And that gets to a nuance that we'll find out whether they're going to try to do that.
All right, let's go to your questions. James Heckel, you have a few.
Yes, and actually it's in line with what what you were just discussing. I was wondering, first of all, about witnesses. I think Jamie Raskin, being a professional lawyer, kind of saved the day at the end there just by withdrawing it rather than trying to, let the senators fight it out. But what are the chances of the former president's lawyers opening the door like this to witnesses? And as a related question, can senators be called as a witness? I was thinking that maybe Mike Lee was going to end up, refuting something somehow and end up, getting himself called as a witness. But is that even possible?
So I think senators cannot realistically be compelled to be witnesses. But look, the Senate can do anything it wants if everybody agrees. And so if Mike Lee wants to testify as to which he, by the way, I'm sure does not, for the reason that Quinta described, which is that, he's trying to throw smoke up not to clarify what happened. But if he wants to clarify it and the impeachment managers want to call him and nobody objects, well, they can do anything they want. With unanimous consent in the Senate, you can do anything you want. So can they be forced to? Probably not. Can he be asked whether he wants to? Sure. And can he, if everybody agrees to hear from Mike Lee can wander up and, be a witness. What do you guys think of James's other question? What are the chances that the president's lawyers somehow open the door to witnesses?
The door was already open. I mean, the rules of this are that the House impeachment managers can seek witnesses after this initial round if they want. So nothing that they did opened the door. It gives them an additional argument if they need to convince senators to do so. They can point to, hey, you even heard it the other day. You had somebody questioning the evidence. So let's start bringing people in to talk about it. But I think that issue is going to be resolved by dynamics much bigger than Mike Lee's outburst.
I agree. I think that I kind of doubt that they'll push for witnesses just because I really don't see what is in it for them. I also think, look, I think that I was talking yesterday about sort of over legalizing impeachment or putting it within constraints that don't really exist. I think that part of what we're doing here may be falling into that trap, should they have had witnesses? Would their case have been stronger, right? Like, what would you do in a trial? The way that I read what the impeachment managers were doing yesterday was making a case not as much to the Senate as to the public, of saying, remember that this actually happened. It was really bad. It was probably worse than you understood at the time. And we're going to make this hurt as much as possible when the Republicans inevitably vote to acquit. So frankly, in that context, the absence of witnesses doesn't bother me that much on either side.
The absence of witnesses bothers me a whole heck of a lot. And I blame Democratic senators for it. I blame Republican senators for it. The only people I don't blame is the managers, because they're stuck in the middle of this. Anya, the floor is yours.
Thanks. My question is, yesterday seemed to focus a lot on Trump's dereliction of duty and what he did or didn't do during all that time. And that wasn't an article, right? It was just incitement. So why wouldn't they have made that an article if so much of the argument is dereliction of duty? I mean, partially because I think it doesn't give senators an out saying, well, yeah, he was horrible, but he didn't incite. It would just take away that excuse.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, part of the defense against an article of impeachment on incitement to violence is to show that the person had the state of mind to prevent violence and didn't want that violence. Even if some of their words could be construed as go march down the street, go fight, if that could be construed as I want you to take over the Capitol building with force. If other things showed that he did not want that, and that's the dereliction of duty part, is the duty would have been, as soon as that happened, the House impeachment managers say, as soon as he saw that violence happening, for the president to step in to do his job and say, stop it, cut it out. I'm going to deploy all the resources at my command to protect the constitutional functioning of government. By not doing that, it helps them prove the state of mind that he was in fact trying to incite with those words earlier.
Quinta, do you have thoughts?
I think I agree with David. I mean, I'm looking at the article of impeachment now, and part of what Trump's team objected to was that, that they were arguing that it should have been split out into multiple articles. There are, in the same way that in the first impeachment, there was sort of a violation of the oath article folded into the other articles without actually being broken out. I think if you look at the current article of impeachment itself, there are elements of it that apply equally to the sort of the failure to respond. So President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and the interests of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. You could apply that equally to the sort of the failure to respond. As to what the House managers are characterizing as incitement itself. So I think what's happening here is that you're using incitement, as David says, in kind of a broad sense.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I'm not sure the premise of the question is quite right. The entire first section of yesterday's discussion was focused both from the beginning of the day on the president's behavior with respect to discrediting the election, with respect to toleration of violence from people who supported him, with respect to calling people to the January 6th protests, with respect to intimidation of election officials. So the entire first half of the day was focused on the president's conduct leading up to the breach. The second half of the day was focused on his behavior during the breach and on the breach itself. And that got, I think, most of the press attention because it involved all that new footage and audio that Quinta was talking about earlier. But the the gestalt of the day was very much about the president's responsibility at all stages of the incident, from before the election to after it. And so I think to the extent the press coverage is not reflecting that, that's really actually a comment on the press coverage more than it is a comment on the actual presentation. All right, a few questions that people want me to read. From Marcello, as Sarah Longwell has written and said, a lot of people who did the actual rioting are going to have their lives ruined. One of the fig leaves that congressional Republicans have used is that we have a criminal justice system for this. And I'm wondering if the way to defang the Trump and Trump wannabes is to aggressively pursue criminal prosecution for all of those who were not and have never been the chief executive. What are your thoughts?
I guess I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Is the argument that the rioters should be prosecuted or people around Trump should be prosecuted?
Yeah, I think the idea is, what do we think about the idea that aggressively prosecuting the people who participated is a good way of addressing the problem rather than sort of impeachment of that, like, we're focusing on a little bit of the wrong question here. You want to stop people from storming the Capitol, prosecute the heck out of people who storm the Capitol.
I think the answer is, to quote a meme, why not both? It's important both to hold Trump personally accountable for what he did and how he engineered the riot. And you see a lot of defendants in these Capitol riot cases saying, like, look, Trump told me to do this. What do you want from me? I also think that it's important to keep in mind that the criminal justice system is also a way to hold people accountable. And the criminal justice system is actually where we've gotten a lot of the new information about what happened, not the videos that were used yesterday in the impeachment trial. But every time there's a new criminal complaint, a new indictment comes out, there's a little bit more information that helps us piece together the events of January 6th. And so I think that that's useful, not only as a kind of a storytelling mechanism, explaining to the public what happened, which we still don't have a clear picture of, but also holding people accountable for what they did and making clear, if you storm the Capitol, we're going to take that seriously as a society, and we're going to make it clear that that's over the line.
On a quick side note related to that, just imagine how different yesterday's presentation would have looked without two things. One, exactly what Quinta said, which is these criminal cases that are uncovering these quotes, these claims about Trump. And then number two, the parlor scrub that ended up, I think, on ProPublica of so many of these videos from inside that showed exactly what happened much more clearly than most of the Capitol security cameras did. What a very different presentation it would have been without those two elements.
Just one little foot stomp on Quinta's why not both question. If you substitute these rioters with Al-Qaeda people, and you imagine that Barack Hussein Obama had behaved toward them exactly the way Donald Trump behaved, change no facts except the names of the organizations and the president, nobody would doubt that A, you're going to prosecute the people who did it, and B, the president should bear accountability in impeachment. And I think that, I think if you think about it from that context, Quinta's answer is obviously correct. Joman Chu asks, can we get an explanation of the brouhaha stated by Mike Lee at the end of the proceedings for yesterday? We touched on this a little bit before, but Quinta, quickly give us an overview of what happened.
Honestly, this is beyond my ability to explain, and I think the fact that our colleague Molly Reynolds, who's an expert in congressional procedure, tweeted yesterday that she was confused is a sign that basically nobody understood what was going on. My understanding is that Lee objected to the use of this report from the Deseret News that was introduced by Cicilline under some portion of the Senate rules. I confess I'm not 100% clear on what the rules were. In order to resolve it, Senator Leahy, who was presiding, asked the senators to take a vote, but it seemed like they got a little tangled up in terms of what the vote was. So part of the confusion was that everyone was voting in response to Mike Lee's comment, but nobody really seemed to know what they were voting for. And then at the end of it, as we noted, Jamie Raskin, who's the lead impeachment manager, sort of stepped in and said, look, we don't need to dwell on this. It's not important for our case. That's the best I can do. I think I tried to understand it, but when I saw that Molly was confused, I decided that there was no hope for the rest of us.
All right. Scott Johnson asks, David, can this process that seems almost pointless in the face of Republican resistance not be seen as a demonstration that some of us still think lawfulness matters?
Yeah, and we're getting to some big questions here. And I think that really is the most important one of all of this, as not the details over witnesses or the fine points of a presentation, even though we are lawfare, we're going to obsess about those things. But that big picture. And I like the point that Quinta, I think, has made more eloquently than any of us here, which is the public aspect of this is perhaps more important than the vote itself, to the extent that there will not be a conviction and a barring from future office. The public record that's created by this, albeit with Ben's caveats that this is not complete and the witness record will not be complete, there's still a role for a truth commission on this. But yesterday, the American public and people across the world saw more in a clearer form about what happened before and on January 6th than we had ever been able to pull together before. And that in and of itself is useful to slap some people upside the head and say, wake up, this is what actually happened in our country. It wasn't just people waving flags on the steps of the Capitol and a few people dying in ways that we don't want to see. They put it all together. They showed exactly what happened. And that is useful beyond the nature of the trial itself.
Ken asks, and I think I can answer this one easily, unlike a criminal case, would it be lawful and legitimate for a senator to vote to remove for a basis not covered in the article? So the answer to the question is no, it would not, but there's absolutely nothing to stop it. So a senator gets a binary yes or no and does not have to explain a vote. And so if you impeach David for the high crime and misdemeanor of having a completely bald pate, and I can vote to convict him on the basis of that he has a beard, that's not legitimate. But there's not anything to stop it either. It's just I as a senator on that vote get to do whatever I want for whatever reason I want. All right, we're going to close with Annika's question because it's a good preview question. Do you think that the managers have shown to a sufficient degree the connection between Trump and the violence of January 6th? And if not, what would you like to hear today? So I asked a version of this question in my diarist that just went up, but it was a different question. It was, after this incredibly comprehensive performance from yesterday, what is left for them to do today? How do you think they're going to use their second 8 hours, having put that on yesterday?
I'll start quickly. Eric Swalwell from California, one of the House impeachment managers, yesterday slipped in very quickly and quietly that Trump had spent $50 million prompting the lie that the election was stolen with media buys up to and ending right before January 6th. And to me, that's an area that could go more explanation, that could have some expansion on it, because that is a key element of what was he doing other than the words that we've all seen and heard, what was going on behind the scenes that was encouraging this and instigating it. But I agree with you, Ben. The presentation yesterday was so powerful. House impeachment managers are better off being very quick with anything else they do.
What do you think, Quinta? What are you expecting today?
First off, I should say I agree with you and David. I think, look, the impeachment managers didn't show that, Trump looked at the Capitol and said, this would be a nice place to hold a riot, but he did essentially everything short of that. In terms of what we're expecting today, I honestly don't know. I think David's theory is as good as any I've heard. I believe the impeachment managers have, I want to say, maybe 9 hours left and 10 hours left. So they have 30 minutes left over from the very first day. They ended early last night. So I'm not really sure how they'll use their time, but we'll see.
Yeah, and to those who were saying witnesses in the chat, they can't call witnesses during this period. This period is for arguments only. Then the president's lawyers get their argument period. Then, if there are going to be efforts to call witnesses, the Senate has to vote on those. So we will see. Just for the record, I think what's going to happen today is the managers are going to use relatively little of their remaining time. Brevity being the soul of wit, and certainly the soul of wittus. In the spirit of which, it is 9:30 and we end on time on Lawfare Live, brevity being the soul of wit. We will see you tomorrow.